Democratic State Representative Victoria Neave Criado, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time. There have been several calls, including yours, for a special session. Why do you believe this is the time?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. Jack, several years ago, you and I visited over the need for a special session after we heard about El Paso and Sutherland Springs and Santa Fe and all of these repetitive mass shootings that had been happening in our state. And what happened in Uvalde is so tragic. It breaks our hearts. And we know that it is another example of gun violence being a public health crisis. I and several of my colleagues are calling for an emergency special session for us to be able to get together, Democrats and Republicans, roll up our sleeves and work to pass laws. Whenever the legislature is not in session, we are not able to actually argue and debate laws in a committee hearing and get them onto the governor's desk. And our community cannot wait until 2023 for the legislature to act. We need action now.
As you know, Governor Abbott is the only person who can call legislators back into session. Have you heard from his office, and have you had communication with his office? In other words, have you reached out and have you heard back?
So we know that the Senate Hispanic Caucus and the Senate Democratic Caucus have reached out, and many of us are coordinating strategy, and we want the governor to act. He has the power in his hands to bring us back to the Texas Capitol to be able to file legislation on this issue. We hear excuses, I think, from some that we need to wait, but the fact is our community can wait no longer. We have the data from previous mass shootings in Texas. We know that there are solutions like red flag laws, closing the boyfriend loophole, universal background checks that are supported by a broad bipartisan community in our state and in our country. So we have solutions that we can enact now so that our community is not waiting any longer for another child to die. It's so tragic what happened there, and the fact that these families can they're burying their children when they were getting ready to celebrate being out for their summer breaks. And it's just, our community deserves more. We need to be able to get into the Capitol, to be able to debate and argue the law so that we can pass something for the people of Texas that will hopefully save lives.
You mentioned some of the things that you would like to see: red flag laws, and also the universal background checks. Why do you think those will be helpful?
Red flag laws would be extremely helpful because we know where there are situations in place. There are emergency or extreme risk protective orders where you know that something is imminent or pending. It gives law enforcement, it gives our law enforcement and the courts the tool to take whatever action is necessary to be able to prevent that. We also need to look at the age that 18-year-olds, for example, if they're not even able to, take certain actions, but you're allowing them to purchase assault weapons immediately in Texas without having to obtain a permit is absolutely something that needs to be looked at to be able to change. Folks shouldn't be able to, especially 18-year-olds, get their hands on assault weapons immediately to be able, and we saw what happened in Uvalde and other situations. So that's something that we have to have those discussions about and be able to figure out what changes in the laws that we need to make. And the fact is the Texas legislature regressed this past legislative session when the legislature passed, despite our objections, and past permitless carry. But we know that change can happen, Jack, whenever our community raises their voice, whenever we see marches in the streets, whenever we see people voting in higher numbers. We saw the changes with school finance reform when our community raised its voice, and we asked them to continue to raise their voice, to hold every single elected official accountable until something is done so that lives are no longer lost.
What do you think the likelihood is that the governor will call a special session? As you know, this is an election year for him and everybody statewide.
He hasn't called it in the past, but the fact is, I don't want to lose hope. I'm hoping that the voices of our community, the calls to action, the urgency, the political pressure on every single elected official to do something now will help drive and open the governor's heart and others to be able to take action. Again, we can't wait until 2023 for another tragedy. We've already seen what's happening across our state with other incidents immediately after Uvalde. And so we just, now that kids are going off, are breaking for summer, we just don't want those calls to action to die down. We're hoping that those calls to action will continue all this year, all throughout the election year and into next session.
I know some of the things that Governor Abbott mentioned on Friday, and Senator Ted Cruz and former President Donald Trump on the Republican side have mentioned making the schools safer, hardening the schools, one entrance, one exit. These are ideas that were considered in 2019 after Santa Fe. Where are you on that?
Listen, we need to look at all available options, but the fact is that Donald Trump and Ted Cruz are beholden to the NRA. They're going to do everything in their power to try to ensure that we don't pass laws that impact gun rights. But the fact is that we have to do something now in order to address the assault weapons getting in the hands of 18-year-olds, to address the fact that when we know individuals have are claiming that they may be taking some action, that our courts and law enforcement have the tools in their hands, like red flag laws, to be able to do something with that, with emergency risk, extreme risk protective orders. The legislature, despite calls from law enforcement to try to not get rid of the permit and the permits to be able to obtain a gun, we need them also to continue to raise their voice about the need to address our gun laws in our state.
What about ammunition and
Ammunition,
high capacity magazines?
Ammunition, high capacity magazines, and just really we need to do a deep dive. And we know that we had roundtables in the past. Roundtables are not enough, but we do have data and information that is not just right here in Texas, but from all across the country for us as a legislature to be able to make data-driven decisions. We need to be able to have those committee hearings where the public can testify about stories that impact their lives and about the need for gun reform now.
And as far as the legislature is concerned, have you had any discussions with any of your Republican colleagues in the House and the Senate, aside from the Democrats?
I have, Jack, and I will tell you that I believe that there is a desire from some to do something. It is a matter of those willingness. It is a matter of moral courage. It is a matter of having our community continue to raise their voices with those of our colleagues who may be hesitant to take certain action. We need them to email, reach out to folks on social media, to send letters about their desire for reform of our gun laws. And so I do believe that there are some that, and I have personally spoken with one in particular that I think has an ability to help drive change on the other side of the aisle. And we will work with anybody, regardless of party, in order to get some change in our laws to save lives of our fellow Texans now.
Democratic State Representative Victoria Neave Criado, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.